Welcome back to the Sleepy Stoic Sanctuary, where ancient wisdom meets modern rest. Tonight, we journey into the life of perhaps the most remarkable philosopher who ever lived, a man who transformed the greatest limitations into the greatest teachings, who found freedom in the midst of slavery, and who proved that no external circumstance can diminish the human spirit. I am your guide through the realm of ancient Stoic wisdom, and tonight we explore the extraordinary life of Epictetus, whose very name means acquired one, for he was property before he became one of history's most influential teachers. This is not merely a story about overcoming adversity. This is the foundational tale of how every limitation can become a teacher, how suffering accepted with wisdom becomes strength, and how the greatest philosophers are not those born to privilege, but those who transform their struggles into universal wisdom. Epictetus was born into slavery in the 1st century of the Roman Empire in the region of Phrygia. From his earliest memories, he knew nothing but servitude, his body owned by others, his daily life controlled by masters who saw him as property rather than person. To make his circumstances even more challenging, he suffered from a physical disability, a limp that would stay with him throughout his life, making him doubly disadvantaged in a world that valued physical perfection and social status. Yet from these seemingly insurmountable disadvantages, Epictetus would develop the most practical and powerful philosophy of personal freedom ever created. He would become the teacher of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, proving that wisdom recognizes no boundaries of birth or circumstance. His teachings would survive the fall of empires and continue to guide souls seeking resilience and inner freedom 2,000 years after his death. Tonight, you will witness how a man with no external freedom discovered perfect internal freedom, how physical limitation became spiritual liberation, and how the deepest wisdom comes not from those who have never struggled, but from those who have struggled greatly and learned to transform that struggle into service to others. Most profoundly, you will understand why Epictetus taught that we are not victims of our circumstances, but creators of our responses, not prisoners of our limitations, but architects of our character, not defined by what happens to us, but by how we choose to interpret and respond to what happens to us. Settle deeply into your bed. Close your eyes. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Tonight, we learn from the man who proved that true freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the wisdom to work masterfully within whatever constraints exist. Be calm. Be clear, be dangerous. Take 3 deep breaths with me now, feeling your body beginning to understand the profound difference between what you cannot control and what remains forever within your power. In through your nose, hold for a moment, and release slowly through your mouth, letting go of any struggle against circumstances that are beyond your influence. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears, releasing any tension about limitations you face, challenges you cannot change, or circumstances that feel overwhelming. Your jaw relaxes, your forehead smooths, and your eyes grow heavy with the wisdom that comes from understanding that true strength is not the absence of obstacles, but the mastery of working with whatever obstacles exist. Starting from the crown of your head, imagine a warm, golden light beginning to flow down through your body. This is not the light of external freedom, but the radiance of internal sovereignty, the same inner liberty that Epictetus discovered while his body remained in chains. Feel it flowing down your forehead, relaxing every muscle, teaching you that no external circumstance can touch the part of you that chooses how to respond, how to interpret, how to grow from whatever life presents. The golden light of inner freedom moves down your neck and shoulders, releasing any resistance to the challenges you face, the limitations you live with, or the circumstances you cannot change. Your arms grow heavy and relaxed, sinking deeper into the mattress, understanding that every constraint can become a teacher, every limitation can become a source of creative strength. Your chest rises and falls in a natural, peaceful rhythm. Each breath brings you deeper into the understanding that resilience is not about never falling down, but about learning to get back up with greater wisdom each time. Feel the warm light flowing down through your torso, relaxing your back, your abdomen, releasing any shame about struggles you've faced or battles you've lost. You are safe here in this moment. You are protected by the understanding that character is built not through ease, but through adversity, not through perfection, but through learning to respond wisely to imperfection. The light of inner sovereignty continues down through your hips and thighs, warming every muscle, teaching you that true power lies not in controlling external circumstances, but in mastering your internal responses to those circumstances. Your legs grow heavy, sinking into the bed, like a philosopher who has discovered that every challenge is an opportunity to practice wisdom. Down through your calves and feet, the golden light of resilience completes its journey, leaving you completely relaxed, completely at peace, completely ready to witness how a man born into the greatest external limitation discovered the greatest internal freedom, and how his journey from slavery to wisdom can illuminate your own path to unshakable inner strength. Your mind grows quiet and receptive, like the peaceful garden where the greatest wisdom grows not from perfect conditions, but from learning to flourish within whatever conditions exist. You are ready for whatever insights this remarkable life will bring to your understanding of resilience, acceptance, and the profound freedom that comes from working with reality rather than against it. You are grounded in this moment, yet open to the transformative story of a man who found perfect liberty within perfect constraint, who discovered that external circumstances have only the power we give them, and who proved that the greatest teachers are not those who have never suffered, but those who have transformed their suffering into wisdom that serves others. You are safe. You are resilient. You are ready to learn how every limitation can become a liberation, how every challenge can become a classroom, and how the deepest strength comes not from avoiding difficulty, but from learning to dance gracefully with whatever difficulty life brings. Breathe deeply, and let the tale of Epictetus begin to unfold, knowing that within every story of resilience lies the seed of your own unshakable strength, and within every example of wisdom gained through adversity, the inspiration for your own journey from wherever you are to wherever you can become. Epictetus spent his childhood and youth in the household of Epictetus, a wealthy Roman freedman who served as secretary to the Emperor Nero. As a house slave, young Epictetus performed countless menial tasks: cleaning, serving meals, running errands, and maintaining the property that would never belong to him. His daily life was controlled down to the smallest detail by others who viewed him as a useful tool rather than a human being with thoughts, dreams, or potential. Yet even in these most constrained circumstances, something remarkable was happening in the young slave's mind. While his body performed the tasks required of him, his consciousness was free to observe, analyze, and learn. He watched his masters and their guests, noting how their external wealth and power often failed to bring them internal peace or genuine satisfaction. He observed how Roman citizens, despite their freedom and privilege, were often enslaved by their own desires, fears, and emotional reactions. He saw wealthy men made miserable by wanting more wealth, powerful politicians destroyed by their fear of losing power, and privileged Romans whose happiness rose and fell based entirely on external circumstances beyond their control. Most significantly, young Epictetus began to understand a profound truth that would become the foundation of his entire philosophy, that there are two types of freedom, external and internal, and that internal freedom is both more important and more achievable than external freedom. While he could not control whether he was owned by another person, he could control how he responded to that ownership. While he could not change his physical circumstances, he could change his mental relationship to those circumstances. This awakening was gradual but transformative. Epictetus began to realize that his masters, despite their power over his body, had no power over his thoughts, his character development, or his capacity for wisdom. They could command his actions, but they could not command his judgments about those actions. They could control his physical freedom, but they could not touch his spiritual freedom unless he allowed them to. The young slave began practicing what would later become the cornerstone of Stoic philosophy, the discipline of desire and the discipline of action. He learned to desire only what was within his power to achieve, and to act only in accordance with his developing understanding of virtue and wisdom. Paradoxically, this internal discipline made him more effective as a slave, because he no longer wasted energy resenting his circumstances or fighting battles he could not win. This period of his life taught Epictetus that adversity could be a teacher if approached with the right mindset, that constraint could clarify what truly mattered, and that some of life's greatest lessons could only be learned by those who had been stripped of external advantages and forced to discover their internal resources. Epictetus's physical disability, the lameness that would affect him throughout his life, became another profound teacher in his philosophical education. In a Roman world that prized physical perfection and athletic achievement, his limp marked him as doubly disadvantaged. He could not participate in the physical competitions that were central to Roman culture, could not serve in the military that provided paths to advancement, and could not present the commanding physical presence that Roman society associated with authority and leadership. Yet this very limitation forced him to develop capabilities that physically perfect individuals often never discovered. Unable to rely on physical strength or impressive appearance, Epictetus was compelled to develop intellectual strength and the kind of character that commanded respect through wisdom rather than intimidation. His disability became a constant reminder that true power comes not from what the body can do, but from how the mind chooses to interpret and respond to whatever the body cannot do. The young philosopher learned to see his limp not as a tragic limitation, but as a daily lesson in the fundamental Stoic principle that we cannot control what happens to us, only how we respond to what happens to us. Every day, as he moved through the world with physical constraint, he practiced the mental discipline that would become the core of his teaching, accepting what cannot be changed while focusing energy on what can be changed. More profoundly, Epictetus discovered that his physical limitation gave him unique insight into the human condition that physically perfect individuals often lacked. He understood viscerally that everyone faces limitations of some kind, physical, social, intellectual, or emotional, and that wisdom consists not in pretending these limitations don't exist, but in learning to work masterfully within them. His disability also taught him compassion for others struggling with their own constraints. Having experienced firsthand how society could judge and dismiss based on physical appearance, he developed deep empathy for anyone facing discrimination, limitation, or disadvantage of any kind. This compassion would later make him an extraordinarily effective teacher because his students sensed that he understood struggle from the inside rather than merely theorizing about it from a position of privilege. Perhaps most importantly, his physical constraint daily reinforced the lesson that became central to his philosophy: that our judgments about our circumstances are more important than the circumstances themselves. He could choose to see his limp as a tragedy that defined his entire existence, or he could choose to see it as one small aspect of a life dedicated to wisdom, growth, and service to others. The choice was always his, and through making it consciously every day, he developed the unshakable inner strength that would characterize his entire approach to life. This period taught Epictetus that limitations, properly understood, are not obstacles to greatness, but can be the very foundations upon which greatness is built. Every constraint forces creativity, every limitation demands resourcefulness, and every apparent disadvantage can become an opportunity for developing capabilities that more fortunate individuals never discover they possess. The transformative moment in Epictetus's life came when he encountered the teachings of Musonius Rufus, the great Stoic philosopher who would become his mentor. Musonius was remarkable among Roman teachers because he believed that wisdom was available to anyone capable of serious philosophical inquiry, regardless of their social status, physical condition, or external circumstances. When Musonius agreed to teach the disabled slave, he saw past Epictetus's external limitations to recognize a mind of exceptional clarity and a character of extraordinary strength. The philosopher understood that his student's experiences of slavery and disability had already taught him lessons about resilience and acceptance that many free citizens never learned, giving him a foundation for Stoic practice that was both deep and authentic. Under Musonius's guidance, Epictetus discovered that his intuitive understanding of internal freedom could be developed into a systematic philosophy of life. The Stoic teachings gave intellectual structure to insights he had already gained through lived experience. Concepts like the dichotomy of control, the fundamental distinction between what is up to us and what is not up to us, resonated with him immediately because he had been practicing this principle unconsciously throughout his years of slavery. The formal study of Stoicism revealed to Epictetus that his personal struggles were part of the universal human experience. Everyone, regardless of their external circumstances, faced the same fundamental challenge: learning to work skillfully with whatever conditions life presented. The slave dealing with physical bondage, the emperor dealing with political pressure, and the citizen dealing with social expectations all needed the same basic wisdom: the ability to focus their energy on what they could control while accepting what they could not control. Musonius taught his student that philosophy was not an abstract intellectual exercise, but a practical discipline for living well under any circumstances. Every day presented opportunities to practice virtue, to develop wisdom, and to strengthen character. The classroom was not separate from life, but was life itself, approached with conscious intention to learn and grow from every experience. Most importantly, Epictetus learned from his teacher that wisdom gained through personal struggle carried special authority and power to help others. Musonius helped him understand that his experiences of limitation and constraint, rather than disqualifying him from teaching others, actually prepared him to offer insights that more fortunate individuals could not provide. His suffering had not been meaningless, but had been preparation for service. This philosophical education transformed Epictetus's understanding of his own life story. What had seemed like cruel fate, slavery, disability, social exclusion, began to look like necessary preparation for a unique teaching mission. Every challenge he had faced had developed capabilities he would need to guide others facing their own challenges. Every limitation he had transcended had taught him methods for transcendence that he could share with anyone struggling with their own constraints. When Epictetus was finally granted his freedom, likely upon his master's death, he faced the choice that would define the rest of his life and influence countless future generations. He could have used his liberation to pursue the comfort and security that had been denied him during his years of slavery. Instead, he chose to establish a philosophical school where he could share the wisdom he had gained through his extraordinary journey from bondage to internal freedom. The school he founded in Nicopolis attracted students from across the Roman Empire, but it was unlike any other educational institution of its time. Epictetus welcomed anyone genuinely interested in learning to live wisely. Wealthy patricians and poor freedmen, young idealists and middle-aged individuals seeking meaning, those blessed with advantages, and those struggling with limitations of every kind. His teaching method was revolutionary because it was based entirely on practical application rather than abstract theory. Having learned philosophy through living it under the most challenging circumstances imaginable, Epictetus taught his students that every moment of every day presented opportunities to practice wisdom. There was no separation between philosophical study and daily life. Washing dishes could be as much a philosophical exercise as reading ancient texts, if approached with the right mindset. Students who came to Epictetus expecting traditional lectures on theoretical concepts found themselves challenged to examine their own automatic reactions, their unconscious assumptions, and their habitual patterns of desire and aversion. The former slave taught them that philosophy was not something to be studied, but something to be lived, not something to be understood intellectually, but something to be embodied through consistent practice. His classroom discussions were famous for their immediacy and relevance. Rather than abstract discussions about virtue, Epictetus would examine real situations his students faced: disappointments, fears, social pressures, family conflicts, career challenges, and show them how to apply Stoic principles to these concrete circumstances. He taught them to see every difficulty as a gymnasium for the soul, every setback as an opportunity to practice resilience. Most powerfully, Epictetus's own life story provided constant evidence that the principles he taught actually worked. Students could see before them a man who had faced slavery, disability, and social exclusion, yet who radiated the kind of inner freedom and unshakable peace that everyone sought. His very presence proved that external circumstances need not determine internal state, that wisdom could flourish under any conditions, and that the most profound teaching often came from those who had faced the greatest challenges. The school became legendary throughout the Roman world, not for producing abstract philosophers, but for graduating individuals who could maintain their equanimity under pressure, find meaning in difficulty, and help others navigate their own challenges with wisdom and grace. Epictetus's students learned not just to think like Stoics, but to live like Stoics, carrying their teacher's practical wisdom into every aspect of their daily lives. The cornerstone of Epictetus's teaching, the insight that would influence Western philosophy for over 2 millennia, was deceptively simple yet revolutionary in its implications. He taught his students that all of human experience could be divided into 2 categories: things that are up to us and things that are not up to us. Mastering this distinction, he claimed, was the key to both wisdom and happiness. Some things are up to us, he would tell his students, and some things are not up to us. Up to us are our judgments, our desires, our actions, and our responses. Not up to us are our bodies, our possessions, our reputations, and our external circumstances. When you understand this distinction clearly and live according to it consistently, you will never be disturbed by anything that happens to you. This teaching grew directly from his personal experience of slavery and disability. He had learned viscerally that while others could control his body, his possessions, and his social status, they could not control his thoughts, his character development, or his capacity for wisdom unless he allowed them to. The insight that had enabled him to find freedom within constraint could enable anyone to find peace within whatever circumstances they faced. Epictetus taught that most human suffering comes from trying to control things that are not actually within our control, while neglecting the things that are genuinely within our control. People make themselves miserable trying to control other people's opinions, the weather, the stock market, or their own aging process, while failing to exercise the control they actually do have over their judgments, their responses, and their character development. He would use practical examples to illustrate this principle. If a student complained about losing money in business, Epictetus would ask, "Is the success of your business entirely up to you?" When the student admitted that market conditions, competitors' actions, and countless other factors influenced business outcomes, the teacher would redirect their attention to what was actually within their control: their effort, their integrity, their learning from the experience, and their response to the loss. A former slave taught that this principle applied to every aspect of life. Physical health was not entirely up to us. We could influence it through good habits, but genetics, accidents, and aging were beyond our control. Others' love and approval were not up to us. We could behave in ways that made us more lovable, but we could not control their responses. Even life itself was not up to us. We could make wise choices that promoted longevity, but we could not guarantee any particular lifespan. What remained always and completely within our control were our judgments about these external circumstances, our desires and aversions regarding them, and our actions in response to them. These, Epictetus taught, were sufficient for a life of wisdom, virtue, and genuine satisfaction. A person who had mastered their judgments, aligned their desires with reality, and chosen their actions based on wisdom rather than impulse, had achieved the only kind of success that was both completely achievable and completely satisfying. His students learned that this was not a philosophy of passive resignation, but of active empowerment. By focusing their energy entirely on what they could actually control, they became extraordinarily effective in those areas, while remaining serene about outcomes beyond their influence. One of Epictetus's most profound and practical teachings concerned what he called the discipline of desire, the art of wanting what happens rather than demanding that what we want should happen. This insight, born from his own experience of learning to find satisfaction within severe constraints, offered his students a path to unshakable contentment regardless of their external circumstances. You are not disturbed by events, he would teach, but by your judgments about events. When we desire things that are not entirely up to us, we set ourselves up for disappointment and frustration. When we want things to be different than they are, we make ourselves miserable in the present moment. But when we train ourselves to desire what actually happens, we find that life becomes a constant source of satisfaction rather than disappointment. This teaching seemed paradoxical to students who had been raised to believe that satisfaction came from getting what they wanted. Epictetus taught the opposite, that satisfaction came from wanting what they got. This was not passive resignation to poor circumstances, but active appreciation for whatever circumstances existed, combined with wise action to improve them when possible. He would use his own disability as an example. I could spend my entire life resenting my limp, wishing I could walk normally, feeling bitter about the limitations it imposes. Such resentment would add emotional suffering to whatever physical limitation exists. Or I can accept that this is my body, appreciate what it can do rather than lamenting what it cannot do, and focus my energy on developing capabilities that have nothing to do with perfect physical function. The second approach leads to satisfaction and effectiveness. The first leads only to additional unnecessary suffering. Epictetus taught that this principle applied to every aspect of life. Students learn to examine their desires carefully, distinguishing between preferences and attachments. It was natural and healthy to prefer good health, financial security, and others' approval. But when these preferences became demands that had to be satisfied for happiness, they became sources of suffering. The discipline of desire involved training themselves to hold their preferences lightly while focusing their energy on what they could actually control. A student might prefer that their business succeed, but their happiness could not depend on business success because too many factors beyond their control influenced outcomes. Instead, their satisfaction could depend entirely on their own effort, integrity, and learning from whatever results occurred. This was not about suppressing all desires, but about redirecting desire toward things that were entirely achievable: virtue, wisdom, character development, and skillful responses to whatever life presented. These were satisfactions that no external circumstance could prevent and no other person could withhold. Students found that practicing the discipline of desire actually made them more effective in practical matters because they could act from wisdom rather than desperation, make decisions based on clear thinking rather than emotional attachment, and persist through difficulties without the additional burden of resentment about those difficulties. The former slave taught that this discipline was the foundation of all freedom, not the freedom to have everything we want, which is impossible, but the freedom to want skillfully, which was always available regardless of external circumstances. What made Epictetus extraordinary as a teacher was not just the wisdom of his philosophy, but the authenticity of his teaching method. Unlike many philosophers who taught from theoretical knowledge, Epictetus taught from lived experience, sharing with his students the actual process by which he had learned to apply Stoic principles under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. When students struggled with accepting difficult circumstances, Epictetus would tell them stories from his own years of slavery, not to compare their struggles to his, but to show them how the same principles that had sustained him could be applied to whatever challenges they faced. He would describe the mental exercises he had developed to maintain his dignity while performing menial tasks, the daily practices that had helped him find meaning within constraint, and the gradual process by which he had learned to separate his sense of self-worth from his external circumstances. His teaching was filled with concrete examples rather than abstract concepts. When a student complained about a difficult family relationship, Epictetus might share how he had learned to interact with harsh masters, not by suppressing his authentic self, but by choosing his responses wisely, maintaining his integrity while adapting his behavior to circumstances he could not change. When students felt overwhelmed by physical pain or limitation, their teacher's very presence reminded them that profound disabilities need not prevent profound accomplishments. He never minimized their struggles or suggested that positive thinking alone could overcome serious challenges. But he demonstrated through his own example that every limitation could become a teacher if approached with the right mindset. Most powerfully, Epictetus taught his students that wisdom gained through personal struggle carried special authority to help others. He encouraged them to see their own difficulties not as unfortunate accidents, but as preparation for service. The student who had learned to cope with financial loss could help others facing economic difficulties. The student who had survived serious illness could offer authentic guidance to others dealing with health challenges. This approach created an atmosphere of mutual learning in his school. Students were not just recipients of philosophical wisdom, but contributors to a community of practice where everyone's experience of applying Stoic principles added to the collective understanding. A wealthy student's struggles with the temptations of luxury could teach the poor students about different types of spiritual challenges, while the poor students' experiences with material constraint could teach the wealthy about the sources of satisfaction that had nothing to do with possessions. Epictetus insisted that philosophy was not about perfect implementation of principles, but about continuous practice and improvement. He would share his own ongoing struggles and imperfections, showing students that wisdom was not a destination reached once and for all, but a daily discipline that required constant attention and effort. This honesty about his own continuing growth made his teaching more accessible and his achievements more inspiring rather than intimidating. Through this method, students learned not just what to think, but how to think, not just what principles to follow, but how to apply principles to their unique circumstances, not just what wisdom looked like, but how wisdom developed through patient practice over time. Perhaps the greatest testament to the power and authenticity of Epictetus's teachings was their profound influence on Marcus Aurelius, who would become both Roman emperor and one of history's greatest philosophical writers. The fact that the most powerful man in the world found wisdom and guidance in the teachings of a former slave and disabled philosopher demonstrated that truth recognizes no boundaries of birth, status, or circumstance. Marcus Aurelius never met Epictetus personally, but he studied the former slave's teachings extensively and referred to him repeatedly in his private journal, which we know today as Meditations. The emperor found in Epictetus's philosophy practical guidance for the unique challenges of wielding absolute power while maintaining moral integrity, managing the pressures of leadership while preserving inner peace. The influence was particularly powerful because Epictetus's teachings had been forged in the crucible of real adversity rather than developed in the comfort of academic speculation. When Marcus Aurelius faced the pressures of military campaigns, political betrayal, family tragedies, and the loneliness of supreme authority, he turned to principles that had been tested under the most challenging circumstances imaginable and proven to work. The emperor adopted Epictetus's fundamental teaching about the dichotomy of control, recognizing that even with all the power of the Roman Empire at his disposal, there were still many things beyond his control. The weather affecting military campaigns, the loyalty of subordinates, the health of family members, and ultimately his own mortality. What remained within his control were his judgments, his responses, and his character, the same things that had been within Epictetus's control during his years of slavery. Marcus Aurelius also embraced his teacher's discipline of desire, learning to want what happened rather than demanding that what he wanted should happen. This philosophical stance enabled him to govern more effectively because he could make decisions based on wisdom rather than personal attachment, could accept setbacks without being crushed by them, and could find satisfaction in doing his duty well, regardless of external outcomes. Most profoundly, the emperor learned from Epictetus that true authority came not from the power to command others, but from the discipline of commanding oneself. The former slave had developed this self-command under the most constraining circumstances, proving that it was achievable regardless of external limitations. Marcus Aurelius applied this lesson to the opposite extreme, learning to maintain self-discipline and moral integrity despite having virtually unlimited external power. The relationship between these two philosophers, one born into slavery and disability, the other born into privilege and ultimate power, demonstrated that the deepest wisdom often comes not from those who have never faced challenges, but from those who have faced the greatest challenges and learned to transform them into strength, compassion, and service to others. Their philosophical connection across vast differences in circumstance proved that authentic teaching transcends all social boundaries, that wisdom earned through suffering has special power to guide others through their own difficulties, and that the most profound authority comes not from external position, but from internal mastery developed through conscious practice over time. The teachings of Epictetus remain as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago, because they address the fundamental human challenges that transcend any particular era. How to maintain inner peace in the face of external chaos. How to find meaning when circumstances seem meaningless. And how to develop resilience when life presents us with difficulties we did not choose and cannot change. In our modern world, we may not face literal slavery, but we all encounter situations where our freedom feels constrained by economic pressures, social expectations, family obligations, health limitations, or political circumstances beyond our control. Epictetus's teachings offer practical guidance for maintaining dignity and finding satisfaction within whatever constraints exist, while working wisely to improve our circumstances when possible. His fundamental insight about the dichotomy of control applies directly to contemporary challenges. When facing job loss, relationship difficulties, health problems, or family conflicts, we can ask Epictetus's essential question: what aspects of this situation are up to me, and what aspects are not up to me? This simple inquiry can transform overwhelming problems into manageable opportunities for wise action. The discipline of desire offers practical guidance for the consumer culture that constantly encourages us to base our satisfaction on acquiring external things. Epictetus's teaching to want what happens rather than demand that what we want should happen provides an antidote to the chronic dissatisfaction that comes from making our happiness dependent on circumstances we cannot fully control. His approach to physical limitations speaks directly to anyone dealing with disabilities, chronic illness, aging, or any form of bodily constraint. Rather than denying the reality of physical challenges or pretending they don't matter, Epictetus shows us how to work creatively within whatever limitations exist, while developing capabilities that have nothing to do with physical perfection. Perhaps most importantly, his example of transforming personal struggle into service to others provides a model for finding meaning in our own difficulties. Whether dealing with addiction, trauma, mental health challenges, or any form of adversity, we can ask how our experience of working with these challenges might prepare us to help others facing similar difficulties. The former slave's approach to teaching, sharing authentic experience rather than abstract theory, reminds us that the most powerful influence we can have on others often comes not from our successes, but from how we handle our failures, not from our strengths, but from how we work with our limitations, not from our advantages, but from how we transform our disadvantages into wisdom. His integration of daily life with philosophical practice suggests that every moment presents opportunities to practice wisdom, responding to traffic delays with acceptance, treating difficult people with patience, facing setbacks with resilience, and finding ways to serve others regardless of our own circumstances. Most profoundly, Epictetus's life demonstrates that external circumstances need not determine internal state, that wisdom can flourish under any conditions, and that the greatest teachings often come from those who have faced the greatest challenges and learned to transform them into gifts for others. As this remarkable tale of resilience and wisdom settles into your heart, let yourself drift deeper into peaceful rest, knowing that you carry within you the same capacity for inner freedom that Epictetus discovered within the greatest external constraints. No circumstance you face can touch the part of you that chooses how to respond, how to grow, and how to find meaning in whatever life presents. Sleep now in the understanding that every challenge is an opportunity to practice wisdom. Every limitation is a teacher, offering lessons in creativity and strength. And every difficulty is a gymnasium, where your character can grow stronger through conscious, patient practice. Let the gentle sounds of peaceful philosophy and inner freedom carry you into dreams where resilience and acceptance unite, where wisdom transforms all constraints into teachers, and where you awaken tomorrow more prepared to work skillfully with whatever circumstances life brings. Be calm, be clear, be dangerous,